Testing. Yay, this works. Alright. I'm actually on time today, which is weird because I woke up an hour ago. I usually wake up at 7, but I woke up at 10. I guess I got really good sleep. Alright, so I'm posting a link to the slideshow in chat. And here's the slideshow. As usual, I have Amicus with me this week. And Dr. Baby's next to me. And so is Francis. Oh, my fingers are in the way. And if you stick around to the end, I'll show you all another special guest. That my mom knows about the special guest, but no one else does, I think. Alright, drink of water, then I'll start. Alright, today I'm talking about video games. This is an art class, and of course I'm going to talk about our video games art. What is a game? Can it be art? So as usual, I including screenshots of games that or pieces of art or whatever that don't really have anything to do with the text. It's just something to look at while I talk about these things. So games can be categorized as many different things. Here's just 4 examples. SEGA, Sega. Starting off with sport, it could be a competitive thing, just as it's displayed here, like Oat and Geometry Clown playing a breakout game with each other. Everyone recognizes this as a use. Sports games are a very common thing. Things like online gaming, a lot of it's competitive. There's esports, professional gamers, which is weird. There's also entertainment, where it's just meant to please, something fun to do, to pass time with. A video game can be a game, weirdly enough, right? Just based around play. And then art is, again, a broad term, as we discussed in this class many times. Like, what is art? And my response is always, whatever. So can it be art? It depends on your perspective of what art is. Some people only think of art as painting and sculpture and drawing. And some people, and they might not include performance art or digital things as art. That's their loss. Or I should say it's their opinion. But really, it could be any one of these things, essentially. So another aspect that people think about when it comes to art is a single object versus mass media. So what I mean by a single object is, for example, Starry Sky, or is it Starry Night? I forgot. By Vincent van Gogh. And it's one single painting. I mean, we see replications of this, prints of it, photographs of it, coffee mugs with it printed on. But it's all based on one singular object that exists by this one artist. And so people tend to think about art as a singular object. And mass media, what I mean by that is a product that is mass produced, meaning there's multiple copies and every copy is more or less identical to each other. And there's a tendency to think of that as less valuable. Whether it's less valuable or not is dependent on your individual perspective, of course. And then there's the in-between. Prince is a really good example. It's always funny saying Prince, and like I can't help but think of the singer. Um, but so when it comes to prints, as in printmaking, what the artist does is they create a matrix, which is essentially the thing where ink is put on. You apply ink to it, and then you can print multiple copies. So this shows. Maybe this is a monotype. I can't remember my print types, but yeah. So this, like, the artist usually makes, I don't know, 20, 50 copies. So there's a limited amount of copies. They all come from the same matrix, but there's a limited amount of them, and they usually are considered to be art by. Well, no one really talks about prints like that, but I would argue that most people would consider them to be art, without question, right? Even though that does have a sort of not mass-produced quality, but there's multiples of these objects that that are nearly identical. However, the first print might be sketchy, but the first prints in the run of this printmaking are usually the best, because sometimes the matrix degrades, so they're not completely identical. So there's always a unique touch to them, and they're usually hand numbered, like 11 out of 50, 12 out of 50, to show you which number in the edition that you have. So there's gonna be a couple F words in this, just to let you know, because you'll have never heard the F word before. So there's this game developer called Fuck Game Dev, where essentially he creates video games where only one copy is available. You buy it. Let's see, like for this one, for example, The Life of a Beatfish. This sells for €230. No one knows what it is until someone purchases it, and only that person will know what it is. But they're able to do whatever they want with it. So this developer is really setting up this scarcity mindset where it's more like a digital painting, an interactive painting, where it's like the amount of copies are limited. But the biggest difference is that the developer says specifically you can do whatever you want with it. You could give out copies, you could delete it, and no one can ever play it. It's up to you. I am gonna say I did buy one for €1, and I made a game jam out of it, and I gave copies of the game to anyone who made a drawing or a game based off of the game, a picture of the game without actually playing it. Okay, so NFTs is a hot button topic in the digital arts. It stands for Non-Fungible Tokens, which I don't really need to explain what that means. But anyway, so what NFTs are is basically a terrible way to implement scarcity. So if you know anything about bitcoins or blockchains, it's based off that, and essentially, if you don't know anything about it, there's a few problems with this. The first most obvious example that everyone knows about is that it creates a lot of energy use. So basically, the way it's been put by this artist Everest Pipkin is computers have to sort of solve this puzzle that takes a lot of processing power, and the amount of processing power it takes by the computer actually has an effect on how much energy is being used, and all the accumulation of all this energy is very detrimental to the environment. And I forgot what country. I think, like, if all this energy usage was a country, it would produce, or I would say, waste more energy than Like Argentina, I think that's one of them. I forgive you for being late, dear Kathy. It's fine. So it's ecologically harmful. However, one of my graduate advisors talked about this other alternative that takes as much energy as a swipe of a credit card. So if that's not an issue anymore, then what you're buying is a certificate of authenticity. So anyone can download a digital artwork because it's on the internet, and you could find ways to download things, right? Pirating, torrenting, basically stealing stuff is super easy if it's a digital object on the computer. And so what an NFT is, it's basically saying, pardon me, here's a digital certificate that showing that you're a genuine owner of this thing. So, I mean, that's understandable, but also, why? Like, you're just getting cred to yourself, like not street cred, digital cred to yourself, whatever. And I'd say a huge problem with this is it replicates the problems with the art market that I've talked about a couple weeks ago. You know, it really benefits people on top of the pyramid instead of the artists. And it just kind of sucks because there's, like, again, I'm really against hierarchy and elitism and rich people in general. So yeah, it's not great, and there's already ways to support artists through Patreon, Coffee, buying their merch and stuff that are, I don't know if I want to say democratized, but maybe that's the right word, where it's controlled by the users. So I feel it's another way to sort of work with, it's like a pyramid scheme, more or less. I'm not extremely learned about this, but from a lot of the digital artists that I've read or heard their opinions about, it's not a very good thing, and I'm not interested in it. Okay, so next point, Roger Ebert on video games. He's an old dead white man. He was a famous movie critic. So he made a controversial statement. I think it was 2012, around then. Said video games can't be art because the players sort of creating the experience in a sense, whereas like with movies, paintings, the artists themselves, like they're the author, they're creating the experience for you. So his view on what art is only the creator has the say in this. And this made a lot of like gamers angry, which is kind of funny. Is that a valid reading? Sure, that's his own reading. But again, when it comes to famous people saying these things, their sphere of influence is a lot larger than just some random person on the internet. So it's kind of irresponsible for him to say this, especially since he later admitted that he doesn't really play games, so he doesn't really have a strong opinion on it, or doesn't have a lot of experience with games. So that was very irresponsible of him. It was kind of good in that it ignited discourse on video games. I wasn't around for it. I was not. I wasn't paying attention to any game discourse at the time. Well, yeah, he didn't think they could be games, but later he changed his mind. Maybe they could. I don't know. Tale of Tales, which is a game studio. They make like artsy games. Yeah, they say it doesn't have to be art, because they could just be games. They could be sports. They could just be entertainment. And the idea must come first. I'm basically reading off the slide at this point. That's silly. Hideo Kojima, who makes the Metal Gear Solid series and recently Death Stranding. For those of you who don't know who this is, he makes these really idiosyncratic games that are kind of weird and yet still accepted in the mainstream. He has opinions on them, and basically what he says, even though his games are kind of considered to be weird, he thinks of them more as like, well, we're trying to reach a broad audience, and so there's going to have to be some compromises with that. So, yeah, it's not necessarily art. So, so yeah, what do you think? Do you think games are art? Personally, just think about this in your own head for a minute or so. What about certain games? Are certain games art? Like, would you consider like this game, for example, which is a very gorgeous game, Aquatic Adventure of the Last Human? Like, is this more of a game than NBA 2K1, or more of art than that? I don't know. Of course, it depends on your perspective. And the third point, does it matter if they're considered art or not? I really don't care personally, but depending on who you are, it might matter to you, but that's not my ideal. Oh. All right, so video games are considered art in the U.S. So there's a bunch of different organizations that protect video games as art, which is important in a sense because it pertains to speech, like free speech when it comes to art. So they're not just considered to be a digital commodity or just a commodity in general. They have cultural value, and art has cultural value, so they're kind of being seen more increasingly as important, right? So they've been in the MoMA, Smithsonian, the NEA has been giving money to game development studios, and and Supreme Court recognized them as art. So legally, they are art in the U.S. I mean, I think that's kind of a weird gray zone that I'm sure some places might not consider them art, but overall, they are considered art. They have the same protections, which matters for legal reasons, which most of us don't actually care about. All right. So this point is mostly for people who aren't game developers. I think there might be a couple of game developers watching this, but for those of you who don't necessarily play games, if there's one thing to take away from this lecture is that games aren't just one thing. There's a lot of nuance to them. There's as many different types of games as there are books or movies. Some of them are pacifist. Some of them are super violent. For those of you who don't play games, you'll probably see more of the violent ones out there because those get the most exposure, whether through controversy or advertisement because they're popular with straight cis males, white males, and that's what gets that's the audience that gets advertised to the most. But there's a lot of other different types of games that you might not know about because of the fact that the most violent games are usually the ones most marketed heavily because they have the most budget. Because again, cis white straight males. Ugh. All right, so I'm gonna break this down into different types of scale of development. So the first one is AAA studios. Those are the big budget games that are being made, which is like Overwatch, League of Legends, Dark Souls, Roblox. There's a wide range within this for sure. But if you see a game advertised on TV, then it's most likely from a AAA studio where they employ hundreds of people. There's hierarchy between directors and, like asset creators, asset meaning objects or things that go inside the game. A lot of these games are updated regularly, and they're considered games as a service, where again things are updated. It might cost there might be a subscription fee. If you have little kids, that's probably what they're playing, because they're so widely available. But yeah, that's the most well-known structure when it comes to games, game making. Indie studios are on the smaller scale. So if you've heard of games like Untitled Goose Game, Phasmophobia, for example, those are games made by smaller studios. The number of people in indie game studios could be kind of bigger, but like usually 10-ish. Actually, it's kind of impossible to say, like to give an estimate honestly. Like definitely less than 50. I've heard of studios calling themselves indie despite having like 40 people. It depends on your definition. So generally these are considered to be more artsy or more expressive or experimental. There's usually a smaller budget, and unfortunately a lot of these studios struggle financially because making games is really, really difficult. It takes a lot of time and working out problems, and there's a lot of issues. There's a reason I don't make like a lot. Like I'll talk about my games later, but there's a reason I don't make games where you have to program movement and stuff like that. So yeah, it's a really weird space to live in. People make a living doing this. Some people like had to stop making games because of this. Some people had to go to a bigger studio because they couldn't afford to do this. So it's kind of sad, but some people like Sock Pop Collective, who makes small games for a monthly fee. They've been able to make it work, but even they've been slowing down their production. And then there's solo developers, where it's just one person making their own singular artistic vision. I put that in quotes because sometimes they are influenced by consumers, like probably Concerned Ape of Stardew Valley. Stardew Valley was made by one person. Yeah, I'm sure he's definitely had people influence the development and of some sort. And yeah, these games tend to be more expressive and more singular and idiosyncratic in their vision. Usually a very, very, very small budget, and ideally uncompromised. So again, like I said, it takes a lot of work to make games, and for one person to make an entire game, even if it's like 5 minutes, it's a lot of work. It's a lot more than you could imagine if you've never made a game. And then there's people like me. There are hobbyist game developers who don't try to sell games commercially. So I feel weird putting myself on here, but actually I got a shout out, which I will show on this Twitter account called Weird Fucking Games. I got a shout out this morning, like less than half an hour ago. So yeah, like they shout out games that are weird, and so this was a game I made inside of a Google Sheet spreadsheet, and I'm just gonna open it up here. And yeah, here's my game. It's just a spreadsheet, and it's a bunch of people interacting with this. I just set down a couple rules, like 1 turn per game. I let people interpret that however they wanted to, and 99% of this did not come from me. So there's a lot of people involved in making this what it is. So yeah, and I don't want people to play or to pay for my game, for any of my games. So yeah, so I'm just a hobbyist game developer at most. Yeah, this is my second shout out from Weird Fucking Games, actually. But yeah, and I wanna also say that these distinctions, there's a lot more distinctions between like indie and AAA and indie and solo developers. Like these are just general. This is just a general thing where like I'm not gonna name everything because it would take like a list of every single developer I know to talk about that. But those are just three general steps to how many people there are. Video games are not just one thing. So there's this German word called Gesamtkunstwerk. Kunstwerk. I really cannot, obviously, speak German, but what that means is games are essentially a lot of different things coming together, like sound, visuals, programming, assets, etc. There's a lot of things going on in video games. So, like, video games are a medium, but they're also comprised of many different media. So, again, they're not just one thing. It's made up of a bunch of different things. So, there's a lot. That's a big reason why one-person developer teams might have a hard time making games, is because there's a lot of stuff that goes into it. I've made games where I had to do programming, visuals, modeling, sound, music, and I'm not a musician or a sound person, so I just kind of like beep 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 beep. And sometimes people have to hire others to help them out, and that's often the case when it comes to commercial games made by one person. So yeah, if you make a game by yourself, then kudos to you. The game that I just showed, the spreadsheet one, I mean, I didn't have to do anything really, just a little bit of knowledge of a spreadsheet. And I made that work for me. And that's kind of the route I'm going, because I don't like programming. I just do not have the patience for it. And I'm not a musician. So I've tried. I've released a bunch of really bad albums knowing they were bad. And I'm like, okay, maybe this isn't for me. So I'm making games that I can do instead of learning and getting frustrated. All right. So roles within the game industry. So there's a lot of different things you can do within the game industry, and oftentimes if you're looking to work in video games, you're not going to be making the whole game, and you're probably not going to like be an idea person, because that doesn't really, I mean, it exists, but like if you're thinking about being the next big Fortnite, but with your own idea and you need to employ, yeah, that's not how it works. There's a bunch of jobs within the game industry. Of course, one of the jobs could be making the whole game yourself, so you're everything. But if you're looking to sign on to one of the big companies, big studios that of a game that's really big, and you want to be a part of the team, just know that you probably want to aim towards something specific, and you're not going to be making the whole game. You're not going to be working on every part of the game. And also, if you're a woman, just beware that it's a really intense culture, and you really have to prepare for the misogyny and the bro culture within the game industry. That being said, don't let me dissuade you if you're a woman and you want to be part of the game industry. That's just preparation. It's kind of a boys' club. However, people are getting called out, and hopefully things will be changing. Okay, so what grows within the game industry? There's, like I said before, there's a hierarchy to these things. There's like game directors and managers. There are some people who oversee the entire production, which sounds really daunting, but I guess it's a thing. And managers who manage departments. Game studios, they have their own HR departments. They're like full-fledged companies with hundreds of employees, right? So it's not just like always just a team of bros making stuff together. There's like they're like proper companies with that just like work with video games. And again, I don't want to dissuade you if you're looking to get into video games, but it's not just playing games all day or thinking of cool things all day. Yeah, that's not what it is. There's a bunch of different jobs. So there's art and creative jobs where you create the art assets. There are more like creative director jobs where you do come up with the concepts, but most of the art positions are in creating the art that the art directors and other collaborators work on, that you execute their ideas. Okay, and there you do have some leeway depending on the company to help out, but that usually depends on the scale. So the smaller scale, the game company you want to work at, the more creative input you might have. So programmers is another aspect. Programmers, they're basically make the game work, like movement, how you interact with things. That's because of the programmers. If there's no programmers, you would just have a bunch of things floating in space, like art assets and characters floating in space who literally could not do anything. So programmers make the game work, but when it comes to programming, you do have to know a lot of math and I think some physics, like really, really intense stuff. So it's not super easy. Managers and producers, boring stuff, blah blah blah. Technical people who help with the servers. So there's definitely some positions within game development where like it has nothing to do with the game. It's just help making sure like the servers are up, moderate stuff. So you're not actually dealing with the game. You're helping with the infrastructure. There's marketing, and there's a bunch of other different things, but those are generally just a very small idea of what's possible within the games industry. So yeah, and this I'm gonna go through a bunch of slides really quickly and not even talk about them because they have details that you might be interested in. So art director, pre-production, writing, animators. Oh, writing. I should say something you know about this. It's not just like writing a fun script or whatever. It's a lot of spreadsheets and collaboration. So again, if you're more than one person working on a game, you're going to have a lot of collaboration between like programmers, writers, animators, artists, level designers, character designers, and stuff. Like everyone has to communicate with each other, otherwise things will be weird and not make sense in a bad way. Sometimes it might be a good way, but yeah, there's a lot of different roles that you can be a part of. And even just the lighting artists, that's a good example of something that's pretty niche. I think niche is the way you pronounce it. Yeah, like just lighting up the levels or environments is a job unto itself. So there's so many different ways you can go about it. So if you're playing Roblox or whatever and you're making everything, I think that's great to have a general knowledge of everything. Here's a weird little snake. But yeah, essentially what you want to take away from this is there's many different ways to get into video games if that's a field you're interested in. And even if you don't want to program, that's fine. However, it's good to like use Roblox or even Minecraft to start making games and start thinking about game design and what's fun, why is this fun, what makes this work, and think about how it looks, and stuff like that. So all right, short little break. All right, so there's different types of arts, and this is kind of a slide that's it's kind of a weird transitional slide because it's slightly connected to everything else. So the types of arts that are normally considered in our culture is fine art, where an art is considered for aesthetic beauty or aesthetic purposes, beauty, where the purpose is just to exist as a beautiful art object, as opposed to decorative arts, where like arts and crafts, where the object is the design, and just reading off the slides. Sorry, told you I just woke up at 10. Like decorative arts are when things have a function to them. So fine art again is like just a painting that doesn't serve any function other than to just be looked at or enjoyed in itself. And then applied arts are like what is the difference between decorative arts and applied arts? Yeah, I don't know if there's any really distinction. I think decorative arts might be more like tapestries. I don't know. I've taught this twice and I never questioned it until now. So I would consider decorative arts and applied arts, from what I can tell, kind of just the same thing from my foggy brain, admittedly, right now, where fine arts are useless other than to look at, and decorative and applied arts are arts where, like, vases, pottery, stained glass, things that are made that are useful in some way. So, and there's also the distinction of high art and low art, which I've spoken about a few weeks ago, which is an elitist and classist way of categorizing art, where high art is basically for rich people. Only rich people can afford high art, meaning like paintings, like singular one-off paintings, like Picasso paintings or whatever. Pardon me. Or like even going to the opera, that's considered high art. And they're considered to be for learned people who are smart. These are intellectually stimulating, and only people who are smart and have access to this can understand it. Whereas low art is more mass-produced objects where anyone can get. Basically, TV is considered to be low art. Like punk music is like low art, even though it's music just like opera, whatever. Or classical music. Yeah, so there's this distinction is definitely a classist thing, where if people talk about high art and low art, it's usually about class, and which involves like other sorts of I forget the word. Like it includes racism, because generally we know that white people are given more opportunities and to advance in society and stuff like that. So yeah, higher and lower, and video games are obviously considered low art because they're mass produced. A lot of people can enjoy them for what they are, and it doesn't take like a philosophy degree or whatever. So the reason I talk about this is because we're talking about game art and art games. So art games is a really weird thing because they're weird. Most people who play games would consider these to be like weird games. They're definitely considered to be more niche, probably more personal, and appealing to a more limited audience. Probably more limited to people who are, man, this is weird saying this, but like more educated in art. The reason I'm having this weird face and weird reaction is because like these are the people who play these games or people who make these games would be considered pretentious hipsters by a lot of people, if that makes sense. I don't want to generalize people who don't. I don't want to generalize anyone, honestly, but if I have to say something about it, it's like, yeah, like a lot of these games would be considered pretentious and arcane, and like you're only playing it to seem deep or whatever, or making it to seem deep, and more important than you really are, trying to be smart. There's always that sort of perspective, which I think is sad, because open your mind, consider things that are different from your own perspective, honestly. But yeah, art games are things that are definitely a lot weirder. They're usually a lot more personal, talk about more personal things. The visuals are often more bizarre. And it's kind of weird, because sometimes things that are considered art games are actually can be kind of normal stuff. Like they can look normal, but have a weird message to them. I don't know. It's very hard to define, and yeah, my job is to talk about art in a educated, deep term. So yeah, of course, like I would be probably considered a pretentious hipster for talking about this kind of stuff, but that's my job, and I'm trained to be able to look at pretentious hipster things, and I can learn how to enjoy them or appreciate them or not like them. Like this game, Black Room, I enjoyed because it was really bizarre, but I didn't really understand a lot of it. If you do play this is the link, obviously. It is very not safe for work. Yeah. I forgot about this slide. So criticism of the term art games. So just like how I talked about with graphic novels, some art games can be considered to be pretentious. They can be considered to be like boring or not fun, or specific, or trying to alienate normal gamers, and by saying we're better than them or whatever. But again, this is one of the things where it depends on the individual. It depends on the individual game, the perspective, etc., etc. So, yeah, I don't really like the term art games personally. I think they're just games, and that's fine, you know. So, video game art is art that is constructed within a video game engine, where it's not necessarily meant to be like a game with goals or whatever. Actually, I will quote unquote play this game. So this is Forest by Carl Burton, and what this is right here it says illustration. So this is meant to be like an interactive illustration more than a game. And let's see when it loads up. And this guy creates a lot of GIFs, and he has created a game called Islands. But yeah, so there's sound, and there's this 3D scene, which I can move back and forth. So, yeah, like it said, this is an illustration, not a game. Okay, and so that's what video game art or game art is. Essentially something made that can be interacted with like a game, or just like a screensaver, basically, or it's just a scene that you watch that was created in the game engine. Okay, and that's different than an art game, because art games are more game-like. But of course, that's kind of a blurry distinction, right? And then game art design is another distinction, where it's the art within a game. Okay, so that means like the easiest example is like if you're playing a game and there's a painting on the wall within the game, like that would be part of the game art design. But also that would also include the texture of the wall that makes what would basically be like a box. You can make it look like a house with the texture design. And that's game art design. And the same thing is making that box, and making that box looks like a house, and making the characters and making the clothes on the characters. Like those are part of game art design. This is an easy one to talk about, the shaders and particles. These like these are really abstract, but like for example, when you see like an explosion in a game, like you see all the, like, you know, all the sparks fly out and the smoke come out. Those are particles and shaders and effects. And this is a job into itself, visual effects, where you create these things. And alone, I would consider these to be art, right? Because they're really pretty moving things. But within the game, if you put them in the context, you just attach them to the end of a firework sequence, for example, that's in the game. Like maybe that's just part of the game, and you might not consider that to be art. And if you are interested in doing this kind of stuff, it is in demand in the game industry. Just know it does take a lot of math and physics. Sorry. So this next slide is from a GIF called How Doom Renders a Frame. Be warned that there is a shotgun in the image and a bloody demon. But I wish I could have chosen something different, but this is just like a really, really good example of what goes into one frame. And what I mean by one frame is there's, within Doom, this game, there's 60 frames per second. So this next slide shows 1/60th of a second. Okay. So these are all the layers that go into 1/60th of a second. Okay. So so you see this going one by one. Some of it's putting the weapon on screen. Some of it's putting the depth in there, the fog, lighting effects, the characters, the health information, the ammo that you have, the lighting. So there's a lot of stuff that goes into video games. So, like, honestly, the more you learn about video games, like, some of the magic goes away, like knowing how it's made. But at the same time, like, it's hard to not be impressed, like how many calculations are done per frame. So there's a reason like these graphics couldn't exist in like 1980, for example, because the technology we have to make this is extremely powerful. Like the amount of stuff we have in our cell phones, it doesn't make any sense how intense, how much power we have in them. So yeah, like think about next time you're playing a game or watching something with 3D graphics, like think about how intense, like all of these layers are going into 1/60th of a second. And if you're playing this game for hours, like how much power is going into these scenes. So yeah, it's really, really intense, and it takes a lot of people to make a game look this good. All right, so this is another question for you, which I kind of touched upon, is like texture art. Is this art in itself? So this is a texture editor where you create the texture here, and then you tell this part, like the top side of some blocks, like, hey, I want you to be this texture. So do you consider this is, I'm asking you, you obviously don't have to answer out loud because you can't, it's only chat. But so do you consider this to be art in itself? Like making a texture, like it could even be a painting that goes in it. Is that art in itself? And then when it goes into the game and it turns into a texture like this that repeats, for example, does it cease to be art, or is it still art? Of course, it could be like, I don't care, but yeah, it's something to consider. It's something that I honestly don't have an answer to. Again, I don't really care, but also like I don't know. Yeah, it's something interesting to consider. But people who do create texture art are called texture artists. So probably but it depends on how generous you are with your definition. All right, so 10 minutes. What are the purposes of video games? So that depends on person to person. It depends on what the developer wants the game to be. It depends on how the player does it, how the media does it, how the media thinks about it. And it can be changed. Like, for example, there's this comic that I have linked here that shows different ways people play games, how they weren't supposed to play it. For example, Nuzlocke Challenge, if you know Pokemon. Being a nomadic vegan pacifist in Minecraft, which changes the entire rule sets of how you play the game normally, right? Or this Green Demon Challenge where you're, instead of like getting these green mushrooms which gives you an extra life, like avoiding them because they hone in on you, and it's fun to just like change the rules or whatever. So the purpose of a game really depends on the context of how you're playing it at that moment, and if you're the developer, like what your intention is and how that intersects with the player's intention. Or like, again, like the Nuzlocke Challenge, which is a widespread cultural thing. Like a lot of people are engaging in Pokemon this way. So think about to yourself for a few seconds while I get another drink of water. What are some purposes you can think about for some games? All right. Now that Amicus is done dancing, so I've only done this list once, the first time I taught this, and this is what I came up in 10 minutes. There's a lot of different purposes that I can find in games. I definitely spend more time playing pretentious art games than bigger games most of the time, and there's a lot of different things that I've come across that I never would have thought about. But a lot of you have known about these, like a lot of different types of purposes because of the Nintendo Wii. You know, when you're playing like bowling, or like, and if there's any fitness games and any like Brain Age, for example, or games that are more like toys, games that are more competition, some that have philosophy embedded in it. It's really, it really depends on the game and what you're finding in it, right? Even some like really deep philosophical art games, they could just be like dumb shooter games. You know, you can reduce them to something different. You know, I think the biggest example for me is like literally for 6 to 7 years, I pretty much only played Tony Hawk games. There's like goals in them where there's competitions and you have to collect things. But for years and years, I just basically lived out the fantasies of skateboarding that I couldn't do in real life, like grinding on handrails. Like I would just spend hours just like satisfying that part of my mind. Like, oh, I would really love to do this. And so for me, it was more like a playground than a goal-driven game. All right, so I have like way too many games for different purposes, but I'm just gonna go through a few. So Chex Quest was actually a game that came in Chex boxes in the early 90s. It's based off the original Doom game, which I still play to this day. And so what's the purpose of this? I mean, it's called Chex Quest. Chex is a cereal. So the purpose of this was advertising, but also entertainment. But also think about the fact that I'm talking about it like probably 20 to 25 years after it was released. Shows that it had some cultural impact, right? I don't know why there's like boogers in the Chex Quest game. I forgot what they're supposed to represent, but your hero's like this cute little Chex man. it's a first-person shooter. It's completely non-violent, so it was appealing to kids. So it was an interesting way of selling Chex cereal by making a game based off Doom, which was immensely popular at the time. Um, Dear Esther is another game that it's what considered to be one of the most important video games because it was modified after a popular shooting game, or it was modded from a popular shooting game, Half-Life 2. I think it was Half-Life 2, where it takes away all the combat, any of the enemies, and it's basically like an interactive poem where you walk along the shore and then you hear all these audio recordings about basically like an accident, and it's essentially like an amusement ride that you can control. Like, think about like It's a Small World at Disneyland, for example. Sort of like that. It's like sad and tragic, and you control where the pace at where you go, but there's no real like gameplay to make note of, and that really changed things. Game tourism mods. So I like this one because these are based off shooting games. It's essentially the same thing as last one, Dear Esther, but JP Le Breton, who's a game developer, decided to take all of the combat out of these games that are about shooting and getting to the exit or whatever, to help you appreciate the environmental design. Because when you're busy shooting things and like running through areas, like you don't always take time to appreciate like the textures on the walls. This is from the game Unreal in the year 1988, where like even though it's dated, this is actually kind of looks pretty, right? So it's a really cool way of like, again, changing the intent of the developers. Heavy Rain, let's not talk about that. Islands, Non-Places is by the same digital illustration that I show. Joy Exhibition, like this one, is explicitly an art tool that where you make your own art gallery, where these AI characters just walk around the gallery and look at your art. But yeah, you have these spray guns that are it's basically like a first-person shooter, but it's just spray and then like you create these little things and you make your own art exhibit. So yeah, that's all I'm gonna say for all of these. You could look at this on your own. What was it? Jokin pointed out The Sims, capitalism at its finest. So the purpose is propaganda, entertainment, play, and toy. So yeah, you're controlling Avatar's life, but a lot of it's like buying all these expansion packs and getting more stuff, And it's funny because The Sims was originally a critique of capitalism, but like of course it became the thing it made fun of. So, yeah, go in and enjoy this. And then I have suggested games, list of games if you want to try stuff. And if you're interested in making games, here's a link to some easy-to-use engines such as Pling Pling, where you make a pinball table, Flick Game, Vertex Meadow, Bitsy, Twine. If you do make a game, send it to me. That would be fun. So yeah, that's really all when it comes to games. So again, I want you to think about games as these weird, wild things that exist. They're not just shooty things, right? They're not just online things where 13-year-olds cuss because they got killed or whatever. Games can be anything, and the reason, if you don't really play indie games, the reason you don't see all these interesting different titles that you might actually like is because they're not as popular, because of straight white cis males, because they demand violent, shooty things, right? There's a lot of different types of games out there that I guarantee every single one of you would enjoy. And I also want to point out that if you do play games on your phone at all, you're no less of a gamer than someone who plays like 10 hours a day. There's any distinction of that is stupid. And also, I'm not a better gamer because I play all these artsy games. I just play games. I actually avoid the term gamer because there's a lot of issues with straight white cis males and how they treat people of color, queer people, women, trans people, etc. Yeah. So, anyways, I could go on forever and ever, but it's noon, and like I said, I'm gonna show you a quick guest. I'm gonna unplug this. Hold on. I'm gonna unplug this. Okay. I'm gonna have to bring my microphone, I think. Alright, so only my mom knows about this beautiful woman. Say hello to Barry. I think you can see her. Right? I can't really tell, but yeah. So for those of you who don't know, which is most people, I got a snake. And her name is Barry. See, she's right here. Oh no. I scared her. But yeah, I just want to show you that I got a cute little snake, and I did make a quick video about her, but I'm gonna make a better one soon with lighting because I do teach video and I want to make a really good one. So yeah, that's it for today. Barry sorry, Barry. I got her a couple days ago, but yeah, that's it. Thanks for stopping by. There's a lot more I could have talked about with video games, but I only have an hour. So thanks again. Love you. Toodles.